The letter was on crisp, ivory cardstock, the HOA's embossed seal glaring up from the bottom like a malevolent eye. Helen gripped it, her knuckles white. She didn't need to open it. She knew what it was. Another violation. Another fine. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the last 5 years, she slit it open. To the residents of 42 Maple Drive. Violation CC 17.3, unapproved flora. The aforementioned property has been found in non-compliance due to the presence of Russian sage, Perovskia atrioplucifolia in the north-facing perennial border. This specimen is not listed on the HOA's approved plant registry. See Appendix B12. A fine of $150 has been assessed. Removal and replacement with an approved species must be completed within 7 days to avoid further penalties. Helen stared out the window at the offending plant. It was a beautiful, silvery purple cloud of delicate flowers, buzzing with bees and butterflies. She had planted it for Mark. It was his favorite. Had called it his little piece of wild sky. Had died 3 years ago, and the HOA had been trying to sanitize his memory from their lives ever since. This wasn't about a plant. This was the final straw. The Cedar Crest Homeowners Association, under the iron-fisted rule of its president, Cora Van Horn, was less a governing body and more a regime. Cora, a woman whose smile never reached her cold, blue eyes, enforced the covenants with the zeal of an inquisitor. She patrolled the neighborhood in her white electric golf cart, a digital tablet in hand, documenting infractions with paparazzi-like intensity. Fines for garbage cans put out 5 minutes early, citations for a child's chalk drawing on the driveway, summonses for the audible delinquency of a lawnmower used after 6 p.m. on a Saturday. Helen was not a vengeful person by nature. She was a retired librarian, a woman of quiet order and deep research. But grief, when squeezed by petty tyranny, can ferment into something potent. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at Mark's old oak desk, opened his laptop, and did what she did best. She researched. She downloaded the entire Cedar Crest CC and RS, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, a document thicker than most fantasy novels. She began to read, not as a homeowner seeking compliance, but as a strategist looking for weaknesses. And she found them. The covenants were a masterpiece of overreach, so comprehensive they were almost poetic in their absurdity. She began to take notes, a slow, grim smile touching her lips. Revenge, she decided, would not be a blunt instrument. It would be 1,000 precise, bureaucratic paper cuts. Phase 1, the bureaucratic avalanche. Helen knew she couldn't fight alone. She identified her allies. Ben, a software engineer who'd been fined for the unapproved beige of his home office curtains, visible through the window, and Anya, a young, fiery paramedic who'd received a citation for the commercial vehicle appearance of her ambulance-like SUV with its reflective stripes. Over coffee in Helen's kitchen, she laid out her plan. "We don't break the rules," she said, her voice calm but steely. "We follow them, all of them, to the letter." The next morning, Cora Van Horn's inbox began to drown. Helen filed a formal complaint, citing Bylaw 8.7 for all holiday decorations, including permanent fixture lighting, must receive pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. She demanded to see the approval paperwork for the Van Horn's own permanent, coach-style exterior light fixtures. Ben, using a script he wrote in 20 minutes, automated a series of inquiries. He requested, per Section 12.3, the certified meeting minutes for the last 42 months to cross-reference the approval of every single house paint color on the street. He filed a separate request for the environmental impact study mandated by Covenant 2.1.a for the HOA's use of chemical herbicides on common areas. Anya went door to door, not to rally a mob, but to educate. She showed neighbors the obscure rules they could leverage: the right to personally inspect HOA financial records, Covenant for .12.b, the requirement for 3 competitive bids on any project over $500 by Law 9.51. The regulation limiting board meeting durations to 2 hours unless a supermajority voted otherwise. Robert's Rules of Order, as adopted in CCR Appendix F. The HOA board, a group of volunteers who mostly rubber-stamped Cora's edicts, was overwhelmed. They were buried in paperwork, formal requests, and demands for procedural fairness. Cora's golf cart was seen less often. She was trapped in her own home, trying to respond to the avalanche. Phase 2, the masterstroke, that Helen knew harassment would only go so far. She needed a checkmate. Her late-night research had uncovered the golden ticket. Covenant 1.1, the Founder's Oak. The central green of Cedar Crest was dominated by a massive, ancient oak tree. The covenant stated that this tree, a symbol of the community's enduring strength, was protected in perpetuity. Any damage to it carried the severest penalties. It also stated that nothing could be erected within 20 feet of its drip line without a unanimous vote of the entire membership. Helen took a walk. She stood under the majestic tree and looked up. And there it was. A single, brittle, dead branch, about 15 feet long, hanging directly over the sidewalk. It had been there for years, a known but ignored hazard. She didn't call the HOA. She called the city's Parks and Forestry Department, expressing concern for public safety. A city inspector came, saw the hazard, and slapped a bright orange condemned notice on the tree, stating that the dead limb or the entire tree if the limb couldn't be safely removed had to be dealt with within 30 days. Panic erupted. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. The only way to remove the limb was with a crane, but the crane would have to be positioned within the protected 20-foot radius. It required a unanimous vote. Helen, Ben, and Anya attended the meeting. The room was packed, buzzing with anxiety. "We have to save the tree," Cora pleaded, her composure fraying. "It's the heart of Cedar Crest. I move we approve the emergency measure to allow the crane," a board member said. "I second," another cried. "All in favor?" Cora asked, desperately. Helen stood up. The room fell silent. She adjusted her glasses. "According to Covenant 1.1 subsection C," she said, her voice clear and calm, "any motion regarding the Founder's Oak requires a unanimous vote of the full membership, not just the board. There are 121 homes in Cedar Crest. We would need 121 yes votes." She let that sink in. Getting 121 people to agree on anything was impossible. Furthermore, Helen continued, "The covenant states that any violation of the protected zone results in the maximum fine per day until the violation is rectified. The crane will be in violation for at least 2 days. That's a fine of, let's see," she made a show of checking her notes, $1,000 per day, as per the fine schedule, payable by the HOA. Cora stared, her face ashen. The HOA's operating budget was meager. A $2,000 fine would bankrupt it. They couldn't save the tree without breaking their own most sacred rule and facing financial ruin. Helen had presented them with an unwinnable scenario, constructed entirely from their own rulebook. "There is, of course, an alternative," Helen said. "We could vote to amend the covenant. A simple majority would suffice for that. We could change the unanimous vote requirement to a majority vote for emergency arborist work. We could even create a sensible exemption for safety-related equipment." It was a way out, a humiliating, necessary way out. The amendment was drafted on the spot. It passed in a landslide vote. The limb was removed. The tree was saved. But Cora Van Horn's authority was not. She had been outmaneuvered, defeated not by rebellion, but by a more perfect and ruthless adherence to the law than her own. She resigned the following week. A new board was elected. Helen was unanimously voted in as president. Her first act was to establish an amnesty committee to review and rescind the most petty and unjust fines. Her second was to create a new, simplified rule. Residents shall maintain their properties in a neat and safe manner. Use common sense and be kind to your neighbors. The Russian sage still blooms by Helen's front door, a vibrant splash of purple against the beige conformity. And on a quiet evening, you can sometimes see her, Ben, and Anya sharing a bottle of wine on her porch, watching the bees dance among the flowers, in a neighborhood that finally felt like a home.